Hallo, Hallöchen und herzlich willkommen zurück zu Let's Play Fragile Dreams. Ich bin an den Gegenstand rangekommen, der da auf dem Schutt lag. Ich habe es lange offscreen probiert, dann ist mir eingefallen, ich könnte mal drauf schießen. Aber es war nur ein Blitzlicht, kein Memento. Aber das ist ja umso besser. Jetzt weiß ich, Objekte, die weit oben liegen, kann man beschießen und dann kommt man ran. Und das ist eine gute Information. Das zu wissen ist Gold wert. Und von daher geht es jetzt ohne Umschweife weiter. Hier bei Fragile Dreams. Okay. Ein rätselhaftes Objekt. Jawoll. Piep. Oh, hallo. Ey, 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 ey. Ja, die ID kann nicht confirmed werden. Ey. Na dann komm, greif an. Ja. Du blöder Robo. Ach. Mit denen habe ich meine Schwierigkeiten. Ich merke schon. Einfach kaputt gehen, bitte. Danke. Kommt vielleicht noch einer, oder? Hm. Ich wette, da kommt gleich noch einer. Natürlich kommt da noch einer. Sprengen können wir nicht, okay. Das ist schade. Aber wir können ja nachher von dem Golfschläger zu Schrott verarbeiten. Ah. Ganz genau so. Einfach ronzen und das war's dann auch. Blödes Mistvieh. Hier liegt leider nichts. Eine seltsame Türe. Okay. Wo uns die wohl hinbringt?
The security's been activated. It's locked tight. Well, only one way to go. Forward.
Right.
Genau, jetzt gibt's also kein Zurück mehr. Guti, guti. Dann gucken wir uns jetzt erstmal das nächste Memento an. Bestimmt wieder eine Glocke.
Oh, I better warm up.
Natürlich, Bisks orangene Glocke.
Everyone in town called the old writer who lived in this house a weirdo. The house was old-fashioned, and the walls seemed weighted with history. So little care and upkeep had been done to the place, it wouldn't be a stretch to call it a dump. The front door was always open, and not because it wasn't locked, but because there was no lock at all. Some would think that an invitation to burglars, but the place was such a mess that you'd lose all interest in stealing the moment you stepped inside. The house reflected its owner, an oddball, aged and in disarray. And this day, that oddball writer was laying in the middle of his hallway. For a moment I thought he was dead, but every once in a while, his finger would twitch, betraying signs of life. The bones in the back of his hands stood out, gnarled under paper-thin skin, but his slicked back hair looked young. The black framed glasses he habitually wore had stayed on, even after his fall. He'd probably worn those glasses so long that they were a part of his very being. And there he lay, weaving my way through the filth and the clothes and the furniture. I entered the house, and he didn't even notice.
Bisk!
He called my name in a gravelly voice. With each call, my body would shiver with surprise. It was a refreshing sound. The old man must have heard it too. He immediately leapt off the floor and turned his back to me.
Not another step.
The man almost spat out.
I don't want you coming near me.
And with that, he went back to the mountain of papers that buried what might have once been a desk. His hand never stopped moving as he scratched at his head. I was thoroughly baffled, and so I sat in the corner of the writer's room until night fell. The bell at my neck continued to tinkle lightly as I tilted my head. Can this man truly be Bisk's family? I came to check up on him every few days, but each time he'd act just as wild and nonsensical. When he wasn't throwing himself on the floor, he was completely immersed in his writing. Disturbed by his unnatural behavior, I tried my best not to allow my bell to ring, and so I stayed nestled in the corner until I finally heard the sound of a pen sliding across the desk.
Phew.
A loud sigh was immediately followed by a loud thud. He'd fallen backwards off his chair.
Finally, finished.
The way he breathed those words sounded so unlike his usual crazed tone. I lifted my head, and the bell chimed to him gently. With his back still on the floor, he let out a low moan.
Oh, Bisk. Bisk, my dear.
I was sure he'd yell at me to stay away again today, but instead he just lifted his thin, ghost-like arm and gestured to me. Just as I neared him, with my careful, steady steps, he suddenly grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and dragged me down with him. At first I went stiff with fear, but then I heard the beating of his heart. He gently closed his eyes and petted me.
Ah, Bisk, is that you? You've gotten so much thinner since I last saw you.
His bony hands were rough, but he petted me softly. As I sat there, unable to answer, the beating of his heart became softer and softer. He continued to coo at me gently.
Finally, I'm able to sleep.
His last words sounded more like he was speaking them from a dream. As the hand on me never wavered, I finally realized. My doubts were cleared. I understood now that this was the orange-belled Bisk's family. And as I gently closed my eyes, I could feel the sound of my own heartbeat, slowly melting free of its ice. I am Bisk. Bisk with her orange bell. The foster child who brings peaceful slumber to the master writer, whom everyone called crazy.
Und das ist schon wieder falsch übersetzt. Es heißt nicht Bisk, die in einen friedlichen Schlaf fiel, sondern Bisk, die den friedlichen Schlaf bringt. Und zwar für den Meisterdichter, den alle verrückt nannten. Aber okay. Ich weiß, ich ziehe mich zu sehr an der Übersetzung raus, aber kommt schon. Man kann nicht einfach so wichtige Details falsch übersetzen. Das geht doch nicht. Und ich hoffe, das im Hintergrund hört man nicht. Das ist mein Drucker, der sich gerade eben von selbst reinigt. Gute Güte, das ist nervig.
No boy. Looks like a dead end. Guess he means business.
A dead end?
In other words, we're trapped in here.
I guess this is the end.
Huh? What's the matter? You're a guy, aren't you? It's too early to throw in the towel. Oh, I know.
What is it?
Would you... Well, would you like to hear my story?
Ja.
Sure.
Endlich.
A long time ago. Long ago, there was a brilliant scientist who discovered, well, the secret of interaction. That is, how humans connect emotionally. The hidden ability to communicate without words. Way in the past, people could have connected with each other using that power. So a bunch of really smart scientists got together to study the idea. They thought if they could reawaken this power in everybody, we wouldn't have to use words to understand one another. They concluded that it'd make the world a better place. There were wars at that time. People argued and fought over little things and big things alike. Everything was a point of contention, and people grew tired of it. The whole world was unanimous in supporting the project. Using a machine they called Glass Cage, humans sent a signal around the world to try and trigger the latent empathy faculty in people's heads. This would enable everyone to naturally harmonize with one another.
After that, what happened?
Well, everybody was excited. Now that they could convey exactly what was in their hearts, all sorts of misunderstandings and ill will would vanish overnight. That's what they thought. The entire world was bubbling with hope. Everyone believed it was the dawn of a new era. They believed and smiled themselves to sleep. But then, the next morning, no one woke up. They slept and stayed like that forever. That's how they all died.
And you think it's happening again?
Yeah. That girl? She's gonna be the catalyst for it.
Catalyst?
Her heart will make the connection. And connect with everybody else on Earth. If it succeeds.
What if it doesn't work?
I told you. It'll be worse this time. Not a single soul will escape. And guess what? The first time around, I was the catalyst.
But, Sai, I don't get it. How did you end up as the catalyst?
Don't look at me. I have no idea. I lived a typical ordinary life. And then one day, they forced me to take all these tests. Before I knew what was going on, they decided to use me. They plugged all these cords into my head, made me take strange medicines. It was all very weird. I'm telling you, in all my days, I'd never felt such intense pain. It happened every day. More experiments. They didn't care at all how I felt. But there was this guy. He had a heart. Sometimes he'd slip me chocolates and candy. He'd even stop by and ask me if I was doing okay. And also, he thanked me nicely.
I see. So you and that guy, well, you were like friends.
You crack me up. I mean, I wouldn't exactly call Shin and I friends. If I had to label us, we were... Wait a minute. How'd that cat get in here? The door's still locked shut.
And the exit is blocked with rubble.
Quick! After him! He might lead us to a way out!
Das war also Operation Glaskäfig, okay. Ein Verfahren, was für mehr Empathie sorgt. Und das hätten wir auch ohne Mie zu finden können, ganz ehrlich.
I found it! The cat's meowing on the other side.
If you crouch down, you should be able to fit.
Here goes nothing.
Ja, ist ja gut, ich komme. Ich komme schon. Direkt zum nächsten Speicherplatz. Also die sind ein bisschen sehr großzügig platziert, habe ich so ein Gefühl. Aber gut, ich beschwere mich nicht. Ich finde das gut.
Better warm up.
Hatte ja schon ein paar Game Overs im Spiel, also von daher gebt mir die Speicherpunkte. Ich nehme sie dankend an. Ich nehme sie dankend entgegen. Hinter den Trümmern. Okidoki. Dann schauen wir mal nach, wo uns das jetzt hinführt. Aber erstmal vom Weg abdriften und mal gucken, was abseits des Hauptweges sich befindet. Auch eine Reise beginnt mit einem Schritt. Jawohl. Oh, Puppen. Memento. Hey, aber ich habe ein Level Up. Ach. Die sind so schnell. Und kaputt. Das lobe ich mir. Und dass ich mittlerweile die Mementos so abstaube, eins nach dem anderen, das gefällt mir auch ziemlich gut. Die Frage ist, wie viele von denen gibt's noch?
It's the same cat from before.
Folge der Miezekatze. Okay, wir folgen der Miezekatze. Katze. Erstmal wieder nach da, denn hier geht's nicht weiter. Das könnte Memento bedeuten. Jep, so ist es. Ach, da kann ich doch nichts machen, wenn ich gerade mitten im Angriff bin. Das ist blöd. Diese Puppen sind generell ein bisschen scary. Wie die schreien. Komm, kleine Miezekatze.
There he is.
Ja, ist sie.
How did he get here in the first place? Wait.
Ich wünsche mir eine kleine Miezekatze für mein Wochenendhaus. Der schenke ich eine Luftmatratze und eine Spielzeugmaus. Da sehe ich einen Speicherplatz, das heißt, da geht's weiter. Das heißt, erstmal die beiden Gänge hier auschecken. Mal gucken. Puppen? Püppchen? Natürlich. Nimm das, Püppchen! Hier weiche ich gekonnt aus. Sehr gut. So stelle ich mir den Kampf vor. So muss es aussehen. Hammergut. Da ist der Save Point. An den gehen wir noch nicht. Erstmal schnappen wir uns ein weiteres Memento, würde ich mal sagen. Und dann ist Memento Lesestunde angesagt an den Speicherplatz. Gib mir. Danke. Sehr gut. Die zweite zu Boden gehauen. Nee, geht nicht. Nein. Nee, nee. Und das war's mit der bösen Puppe. So, dann würde ich jetzt sagen, können wir uns entspannt zurücklehnen und noch ein paar Mementos lauschen. Und ja, es ist ein entschleunigtes Spiel. Hier geht nicht immer Action ab. Also von daher, mir gefällt es mit Mementos. Wenn es euch nicht gefällt, könnt ihr gerne vorspulen.
Man, I'm getting sleepy. Is this?
Eine Babysocke.
Oh, you're still so small. You'll soon be born. So this message is for you. There may come a day when you'll curse being born into this world. You'll wonder what you did to deserve this. And you'll probably have plenty of bitter words to tell me. But I don't think I'll be around by then to listen to your complaints. I want you to know how truly sorry I am. I just want you to believe this. No matter what happens, all we wanted was for you to be happy.
Das war ein kurzes Memento, aber ein schönes Sparbuch.
To-do list. 1. Eat a whole cake by myself. 2. Share a meal with my family. 3. Visit all the friends I can. 4. Read all the books I've wanted to. 5. Buy the clothes I always dreamed of. 6. Make up with that certain somebody.
Auch ein kurzes Memento. Und Chris silberne Glocke. Heide Witzka.
The silver bell wasn't a particularly outstanding decoration, but it did ring the most beautifully. I'd always wondered what kind of home such a lovely bell had come from. It belonged to an old woman who lived alone without relatives, in a large mansion I'd never seen before.
Madam, it's time for supper. Thank you, dear.
Madam, the lilies in the garden have bloomed. I've put them in this vase.
What a lovely scent.
Madam, it started raining. Allow me to close the windows.
Yes. And draw the curtains, too.
The old woman was waited on hand and foot by her servants. She'd rely on their help as she sat idly in her chair, listening to her favorite music. She'd even ask them to change out the records. But most of the servants seemed to genuinely adore their employer. But there was one thing the old woman would ask several times a day.
Excuse me, but could you call Chris here for me?
Later that same day,
Oh, where is Chris?
and again even later,
Please find Chris for me.
though normally obedient, this one request was always met with hesitation. Madam, Chris is all ready. The maids would start cautiously. Oh yes, you're quite right, the old woman would say, cutting them off.
She's not with us anymore, is she? I'd nearly forgotten.
She'd murmur with a nod. But not a few hours later, she'd ask the same questions again. She had them stop her favorite record.
Oh, wherever could my darling Chris be?
One rainy night, the mansion was in an uproar. Madam? Madam! The servants dashed through the halls in a frenzy. Finally, one of the maids shouted in despair.
Why can't I find her cane?
Though it wasn't too cold outside, the sheets of rain continued to pour relentlessly.
She couldn't have gone outside. Could she?
A chill passed over the gathered servants before they set out. They put on their coats and called for help outside. I tore my eyes from them and made for the rain-drenched town. Amidst the downpour, I smelled the sweet fragrance of lily. In the back lane of a park, far from the mansion, I made out the figure of the old woman. She was surrounded by a crowd who moved and gabbed around her.
Come on, lady, you'll catch your death out here. Maybe you should see the police.
The old woman's shoes and designer clothes were soaked through. A man tried taking her by the hand, but the old woman refused to budge, her face adamant. Fed up with her antics, the men finally left, leaving her behind. I cautiously stepped just into her field of vision, and without saying a word, rang my silver bell. It rang clear through the rain. The old woman raised her head sharply in surprise, her blurry eyes looking at me.
Chris?
The old lady rasped. I rang the bell again in a nod, and then turned around.
Chris, wait! Wait for me!
Her cane clicked as she followed me. I may not be able to carry her all the way to the mansion, but it'd be enough to bring her to her servants. I stopped often to look over my shoulder, to make sure I didn't lose her. The sound of that beautiful bell was a beacon. At last, one of the servants noticed the old woman and shouted, "Madam!" As she ran towards her, the old woman bent down to scoop me up and held me, trembling. The servants weren't able to hide their surprise, seeing how much the late Chris had changed upon her return. Not one of them said that I wasn't Chris, because the old woman called me so. The maids nodded in obedience, just glad that their beloved employer had returned home safe. I am Chris. Chris with her silver bell. I'm the tiny, adorable Chris, loved by her grandmother in this grand mansion.
Und Marias rosa Glocke 1. Okay, dann muss es noch einen zweiten Teil geben. Bin gespannt.
I've gained so much. Gentle hands and many, many new names. Mondays, Henri. Tuesdays, Fleur. Wednesdays, Sylvia. Thursdays, Lot. Fridays, Bisque. Saturdays, Chris. And for just one day, I'm no one else but myself. It was supposed to be revenge. Revenge for the deceased girls who'd led a better life than I. With vengeance and blasphemy laid to rest, all that's left is me, a lie. Before I knew, I began wondering about the future. When? Tell me, when? When will I fall in love? Once I find someone who loves me, I'll finally be given a name. Not just someone else's substitute, but a name all my own. That's what I decided. So then why? Why did I have to meet him? He lived on a cliff face that looked down on the town. His features were considered striking, his posture regal. But those weren't the only things that made me stop in my tracks. I didn't really need a reason, because to him, it didn't matter what bell I put on. Nothing would change the fact that I was nothing. A bell with 2 stripes of light pink lay at his feet. It didn't belong to him. The bell, like his love, was waste on the street. His features knew despair. You could see the hollowness of death in his eyes. No matter how much I stared or spoke, he never once looked back at me. I gingerly pick up the rosy pink bell. Its soft sound should be enough to reach his ears, stir his heart, and open his eyes. Then, in a husky voice, he will speak in a tone drowning with emotion.
Maria?
And I'll choke up with emotion and smile as I say, "That's right. I'm your Maria. And then there won't be any real me left in this world.
Please. Tell me your real name.
I giggle softly and answer again. I'm Maria. His brow will surely furrow as he snuggles close.
That's not your name.
But that's the name of your beloved, right? I loved you. But the one that you loved was never me at all. You loved the real owner of this pink bell. Imagine it. A rival whom even death couldn't kill. The one woman he really loved. I hated her, cursed her, and stole her name and identity. And I do it no matter how miserable it makes me.
Oh, Maria. If we'd never met, then I'm sure I'd have rotted away right on the spot.
Those are the only words that can bring me salvation now. As long as you're happy, then I'll never need a silly name. A storm was brewing. The high winds that had been beating on the windows since morning gathered dark clouds and pelted the forest trees. I leapt from the safety of the old woman's blanket, raced through the town, and headed for the mountain cottage, my old hideout. I'd take a bell and think about the past each time I came here. I go by many names now. So whose ghost remains in this dreary mountain hut? A brilliant flash of light, coupled with thunder, filled the sky. Every hair on my body stood on end. There was a tearing sound of wood splitting. Chills ran down my spine. I quickened my pace without thinking. A tremor crept down my back. The scene that greeted me as I reached that hut was indescribable. A massive cloud of smoke clogged my nose and burned my skin. The mountain was on fire, and the gusty winds helped spread the flames quickly. In my panic, I dove into the hut. The heat was as hot as stoked coals, but through the burning and stench, I knew I had to salvage my bells. They'd been proof that the girls had lived, and now they were the one place I felt at home. I gathered the 7 bells and made for my escape, but the hut entrance was already engulfed in flames. I leapt through a broken window, feeling as though I was being burned alive. I could hear the destruction all about me. Just outside the window was the cliff face. I jumped down from my perch, prepared to take the dive. Through it all, I kept the 7 bells tightly held in my mouth.
Okay, das war eine lange Geschichtssession. Ich hoffe, es hat euch trotzdem gefallen, auch wenn diese Folge nicht so viel Action war. Wenn es euch gefallen hat, lasst mir noch einen Daumen und einen Kommentar da. Die lese ich immer sehr gerne. Wenn es euch sehr gefallen hat, dann lasst mir ein Abo da, damit ihr nichts mehr verpasst. Wir sehen uns beim nächsten Mal, wenn es wieder heißt Let's Play Fragile Dreams. Ich freue mich auf euch, wünsche euch noch einen traumhaften Tag. Bis dahin, bye bye, euer Rainy.